From our studios in Olympia, Washington, TCTV presents South Sound Seniors, news and views featuring the people, places, and events that impact our growing senior community here in the South Sound region. Our program is presented as a community service to inform and involve you and yours in the lives of older adults. Your host for South Sound Seniors is the Executive Director of Senior Services for South Sound, Eileen McKenzie Sullivan.
Welcome to South Sound Seniors, a program for and about older adults in our community. First of all, I want to say a big thank you to TCTV for the volunteers and the paid staff here that make this show possible. Every other month, Senior Services partners with the Senior Action Network to bring some really vital and essential information to our seniors at home. And this month is one of the months that we're partnering with SAN, and I'm really excited because Kathy Morgan is here from DSHS to talk about Adult Protective Services. So welcome, Kathy.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Now, you just told me that you have been with DSHS for quite a few years.
I have. I've been with the department for 23 years.
Wow. I just don't think that's possible. You look way too young to have been there for 23 years.
Thank you.
Wow. But most recently, your recent job is you oversee a lot of people that do the adult protective services in our communities.
I do. I oversee the Adult Protective Services program.
And how long have you been in this position?
I've been in this position almost a year and a half.
Okay, wow, so excellent. And you weren't a stranger to Adult Protective Services, but when you got to the supervisory position, either.
No, I was a supervisor of Adult Protective Services and oversaw the program prior to taking this position. That's correct.
Wow. Well, thanks so much for coming in. I really appreciate it. But why don't we start out with something really essential, really basic. I sometimes forget, because I work in the senior world, that some people might not know. What is Adult Protective Services?
Well, Adult Protective Services is part of the Department of Social and Health Services, which many people might not know. Adult Protective Services investigates vulnerable adult abuse, and we investigate we do those investigations in private residences or in licensed facilities such as adult family homes or in nursing homes.
Okay. Okay, so the term vulnerable adult, though, can you kind of explain what do you consider a vulnerable adult?
Sure. So a vulnerable adult is a person, a definition is a person 60 years of age or older with a cognitive or physical inability to care for themselves, or a person who's 18 years of age or older with criteria such as a developmental disability. Now, the Washington State Legislature defined a vulnerable adult as someone who needed protections or services or safeguards in order to provide for themselves or to protect them from abuse. And basically, a vulnerable adult is a citizen of Washington State that meets the criteria of vulnerable, one of our most vulnerable citizens of the state.
Right, somebody who really can't care for themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. So then I guess we go to the other side, is how do you really define, or what do you call abuse in the situations that you're dealing with?
Right. Well, abuse is defined as an intentional or neglectful act that causes injury or harm to somebody. And I think most people are probably familiar with physical abuse,
Sure.
But Adult Protective Services also investigates other abuses, which include abandonment, sexual abuse, neglect, self-neglect, financial exploitation.
Okay, so there's...
And I think people need to know that abuse can happen by strangers, it can happen by family, it can happen by caretakers, people that we're close to.
Yeah.
It can happen to anyone. It can happen to men and women of all ethnic backgrounds, people of all social and economic status.
Yeah, yeah, it really can. Well, tell me a little bit about kind of what you consider the self-neglect. What kind of describe that a little bit for me?
That's a really good question, Eileen, and that's one that we get asked quite often. Somebody who's self-neglecting might be somebody who's in their own home, who doesn't have any family or any caretaker. they're unable to meet their own daily needs. So they're unable to provide, maybe cook their own meals, maybe take their own medications. They're unable to shower or, clean their own homes. The kind of things that you and I take for granted every day, take their own medications. And that at a point becomes unhealthy for them. That comes to a point that it becomes self-neglect.
Yeah, those must be some of your really hard cases.
They are the very
too.
hard cases.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that fact.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Those are tough cases.
Yeah, I'm sure it really is. So I guess if our viewers are wondering, well, what should I do, or how do I know if some neglect or abuse is going on?
So what somebody should do is they should make a report to Adult Protective Services. And DSHS operates a toll-free number, and that number is 1-866-END-HARM. And I just want to make sure that everybody gets that number because it's very important.
Okay.
It's 1-866-END-HARM, and they can make a report to that number. It's toll-free, it's confidential, it's 24 hours a day, and it's TTY accessible. Don't assume that anybody's made a report. Just make that report. Even if you're not sure if somebody's self-neglecting or if somebody's being abused or if somebody is, if you're unsure of the circumstances, please make that report to that number. It's a public responsibility. Adult Protective Services can only do so much. We can't do anything without a report from the public. So it's a partnership with our public, law enforcement, bank tellers, community members, neighbors, friends, family. Again, without those reports from the public, Adult Protective Services can't do anything. But if you know of anybody that's in immediate danger, you need to call 911 because law enforcement can intervene immediately. So I think
that's a good point.
People need to know that.
So if you see something happening that's really dangerous, 911.
Yes, absolutely.
So I would imagine sometimes a neighbor may hesitate because they are afraid that they'll get in trouble or that the neighborhood will get tense if it's found out that they were the ones that made the call.
Right. Adult Protective Services keeps everything confidential. So if somebody makes a report, that information is confidential. There's no way that information would be released. The only time any information is released about anybody that makes a report or would be under a court order.
Okay.
Or if there's a judicial proceeding. So any information is kept confidential.
Okay, that's really probably
Very
encouraging
important.
for somebody, yeah. Now I also know there's people that are really supposed to legally make reports, people that work in the aging field or nurses or doctors. There are some people that have to make a report.
Correct, that's correct. There's mandatory reporters that are required by law to make reports.
Right. So give us a little bit of an idea of, so what happens if Adult Protective Services is called? What happens then at that point?
So once Adult Protective Services receives that call, again at that 1-866-END-HARM number, which is very important, the person gives their information. They'll receive a call back from a social worker who's also the investigator on the case, and they will ask for your name and your phone number because they'll want to be able to call you back if they need additional information. They will also want to know the person who you're calling about, their name, their address, their phone number. They'll want to know the abuser, information about the abuser, their contact information if you have it. If you don't have it, that's fine. As much information as you can give us would be appreciated. Any identifying information that you do have about the abuser, if you have a vehicle, a license plate number, anything that would help us identify that person is helpful. And what you know about the event that happened. Whatever the abuse was or whatever the observation was that you know about. That's the information that we'll be asking during that conversation.
Right, so kind of gather their thoughts together and have as much information as they can.
Right.
At hand, okay. So then what can the department do? What can DSHS do? What can the workers do?
DSHS can provide protective services. We can provide as much services as that person is willing to take from the department. We can, during the investigation and while the investigation is going on, we can offer services to that person. We can offer services such as Meals on Wheels, transportation services, caregiving services.
So basically things that will help that person be safe if they're afraid. Maybe I don't want to turn in my caregiver because then who'll take care of me?
Right.
Right. So you can kind of assure them that they're going to be okay.
Right.
Okay. So then kind of in the bigger picture, what else happens when Adult Protective Services comes in and the report is made?
So when a report's made, Adult Protective Services can provide services. And then Adult Protective Services again can assist with other services. And then
what if something legal has to happen because it has been, like, say, physical abuse or financial exploitation?
Financial exploitation, or it can go to guardianship or vulnerable adult protection orders. Law enforcement does get involved in some cases. We have guardianship proceedings or vulnerable protection orders.
If there's nobody else
right.
available or around. Okay. So can you there might be some signs of abuse that I'm not aware of or that our listeners aren't aware of. What should people kind of look out for?
So there's obvious signs of abuse, and I have some examples that I brought with me that I wanted to share. But there's some obvious signs of abuse, and I think those obvious signs would be injuries, bruises.
Yeah.
Those are very obvious signs. If an adult's left out in weather conditions that are inappropriate for what somebody's wearing. Daily living needs, example, the caretaker ignores freezing conditions, weather conditions, when somebody's not dressed appropriately for those conditions.
Sure.
Property and finances is a big one. You start to see somebody taking over finances, transferring bank account or resources, for instance, transferring of assets, vehicles, verbal aggression, intimidating somebody, or using some intimidation towards somebody. Isolation is another one. Somebody that you might have noticed who is attending church services and no longer is attending church services after so many years. That might be a sign of isolation. I think it's very important for the public to look at those warning signs and watch the physical behaviors as well as the emotional behaviors, and listen to what the caretaker and the victim are saying about the reasons and the excuses they're giving.
Kind of look a little deeper.
Right.
Sometimes.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Sudden appearance of an unknown relative or somebody that's, again, taking over bank accounts or transferring of vehicles or things like that. I think it's important.
Speaking for a person sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
Very important to watch those things.
Yeah. Okay. So what more can a person do to protect a vulnerable adult?
I think it's important to maintain contact with vulnerable adults. If you're a neighbor or a friend or family member, maintain contact. Do vulnerable adults know who to contact? Do they know about DSHS services that we provide? Do they know about Adult Protective Services? APS, Adult Protective Services, we're more than willing and happy to come out and do a presentation at senior centers, schools, conferences, at your events, churches. Call us up. We're happy to come out. Raise awareness in your community. Yeah. Talk about Adult Protective Services. Talk to your elders. Talk to your community, and raise awareness. Support caretakers. DSHS provides programs that help caretakers too. Caregiver support programs. So there are those programs out there that provide that support.
Right. I imagine sometimes what seems to be abuse or can be abuse is because somebody gets so frustrated they get to their last ounce of strength and they just crack. Sometimes.
Caregivers might need that respite, or that
Right.
might need some support.
Yeah.
And then, of course, again, make sure everybody has that 1-866 End Harm number.
That's right. Yeah. So anything else you want to tell me about Adult Protective Services?
I do. I want to share, I want people to know how many reports that we received over the last, in 2012, in Thurston County, we received over 840 reports of abuse in Thurston County. And statewide last year, we received over 19,000 reports in Washington State.
Well, that's a good sign that people are looking out for our vulnerable people.
Yes.
So when you get a report, does it take long for a worker to actually get out and try to find out what's going on?
We have response times, and those response times we have to meet. There are times when we can't meet response times because people aren't home, or we can't, meet them because of those factors. But we do have response times that we're required to meet under law.
Well, I just take my hat off to the workers that get out there and see some of these, I'm sure, very hard situations that people can be in.
Yes.
So please thank them on behalf of all of us.
I will.
And thank you, Kathy, so much. This is really essential. Will you come back again? Because I think this is a message that needs to get out to our public. And
I will.
Great.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. You did a wonderful job. I know you were nervous coming in, but you did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Very clear. Give us the number one last time.
1-866 End Harm.
Okay. Thank you, Kathy, for all you do.
In case you hadn't noticed, there's a great energy at work here in the South Sound. It's called SAN, the Senior Action Network, and the name says it all. The collective knowledge, experience, and commitment of dozens of organizations and service providers represents an invaluable resource for older adults and their families. Truly, SAN is there when you need to reach out. Find out more, visit their website, or call us at 586-6181 and get on board as we celebrate live.